So currently we have a couple of validation rules in the middle of our markup. Now, as our form gets more complex, we'll end up with a lot of validation rules all over the place. In that case, it's better to use a technique called schema-based validation. So there are various libraries out there that allow us to define all our validation rules in a single place, which we call a schema. So we have Joy, which I presented in my previous React course. We also have Yep and Zod and many other libraries. Zod has been trending lately, so I decided to use it in this course. But I have to tell you, there's a lot more to Zod than we can cover in this course. In this course, I'm just going to show you the basics so you have an understanding of how you can integrate Zod with React Hook Forms. If you want to use Zod in your projects, you need to look at its documentation to learn more. So open up the terminal and install Zod version 3.20.6. All right, now back to our code. On the top, we're going to import Z from Zod. Now, using Z, we can define the shape or scheme of our form and all its validation rules. So here we call Z.object. As an argument, we pass an object with properties that represent our form fields. So our form has a name field, which is a string with a minimum of 3 characters. So using the syntax, by chaining method calls, we can define our validation rules in a single place. Now, by the same token, we can say that our form has an age field, which is a number with, let's say, a minimum of 18. Now, Zod has a lot of helper methods that allow us to define various validation rules. For example, we can say this number has to be positive or negative or whatever. We can also define custom validation rules, but that's really outside the scope of this course. So we call the object method and pass a configuration object that represents the shape of our form. Now, this returns an object that we can store in a constant called schema. We could call it anything, but schema is a common name. Now, as you can see, we have a bit of duplication in this code. There are 2 places where we have defined the shape of our form. Now, the great thing about Zod is that it has a method that allows us to extract a type from a schema object. So we don't have to type this interface by hand. So let's remove the form data interface. Instead, here we call z.infer. In square brackets, we type type of schema. Now this returns a TypeScript type, which is similar to an interface. So using a type, we can define the shape of an object. So we store the result in a type called form data. Now, if you hover your mouse over form data, you can see that form data represents an object with 2 properties, name, which is a string, and age, which is a number. So a TypeScript type is very similar to a TypeScript interface. So that was the first step. Using Zod, we defined a schema for our form. Now we need to integrate React Hook Forms with Zod. So back to the terminal, we install @hookform/resolvers version 2.9.11. So this library includes resolvers for various schema-based validation libraries like Zod, Joy, Yep, and so on. So let's go ahead and install this. Good. Now, on the top, we import Zod resolver from @hookform/resolvers/Zod. Now, when calling the form hook, we pass a configuration object and set resolver to Zod resolver function that we imported on the top. Here we call this function and pass our schema object. Okay, we're almost there. The next step is to consolidate our error messages. So first of all, now we can remove these validation rules while registering this field because all our validation rules are now defined in our schema. Okay. Also, with this technique, we don't need separate paragraph elements for different error messages. So I'm going to delete the second one. Instead, we're going to have a single paragraph. We just need to change this Boolean expression. So we no longer need to check for the type. We just want to check for the existence of a property called name in the errors object. So we can simplify this to an expression like this. So if you have errors.name, then we render a paragraph with, instead of hard coding this error message, we can render it dynamically from errors.name.message. So Zod will take care of generating error messages based on the schema that we defined up here. So it generates default error messages, but we can always customize them, as I will show you in a minute. So let's move on. Here's the error message for the name field. Now to save time, I'm going to copy this and paste it right after the age field. We just need to change errors.name to errors.age. Okay? Now if we submit the form, we get these default error messages. The first one is saying string must contain at least 3 characters. If you don't like this error message, you can always customize it. So when specifying our validation rules, here we can pass an object with a message property. We can say name must be at least 3 characters. Now let's submit the form again. We get a more friendly error message. That's better. But what about the age? The error is saying expect a number, received string. The reason this is happening is because the value property of input fields always returns a string. So we need to instruct React Hook form to interpret this value as a number. This is where we register the age field. Here we pass an object and set value as number to true. Now let's refresh and submit the form again. All right, this time we get a different error saying expect a number, received NaN, which is short for not a number. So because the value of this field is an empty string, and empty string is not a valid number, we get NaN or not a number. To provide a more friendly error message, when setting the validation rule for the age field, here we pass an object, and here we set invalid type error to age field is required. Now back to the browser. Let's submit again. That's better. So if I type a name with more than 3 characters, the error goes away. If we type an age that is less than 18, let's say 10, we get an error message saying number must be greater than or equal to 18. Again, we can always customize the default message. So back to our schema, where we specify the minimum age value. Again, here we can pass an object with a message property saying age must be at least 18. Now let me save the changes. So the code is reformatted. Okay, that's better. So this is how we can validate our form data using Zod. Again, there is a lot more to Zod than we can cover here. If you want to learn more, head over to zod.dev. This is the complete documentation for Zod.